Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're going to do a How I Would Have Booked. The topic of this How I Would Have Booked: casting wrestlers as the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Now you may have seen my video where I did casting wrestlers as the X-Men. You can't have the X-Men without having them have villains. For the most part, the Brotherhood has been their most consistent villains, where there have been changes in both teams' lineups over the years, much like the X-Men. I'm not picking a specific Brotherhood team, more so, in my opinion, what my favorite Brotherhood characters are, some of what I would consider the most important Brotherhood characters. And yes, I'm going to shorten it to the Brotherhood, so I don't have to say Brotherhood of Evil Mutants every time. There are a couple caveats. If you were already cast as part of the X-Men, I'm not going to cast you in this, because the thought is these guys are going to have a movie together. With that being said, let's jump right into this. We're going to start off with what most people consider the leader of the Brotherhood, and who has been the leader through most of its incarnations, Magneto. For Magneto, it was much like I thought with Professor Xavier. I needed someone that was a little bit older, a little bit wiser, but unlike Xavier, I also needed someone that was cold and calculated and could pull out that devious side if he really needed to, and was willing to do anything to get his point across. For that, there was one guy that came into my mind, and that was Randy Orton. To me, Randy has all of the traits you would need to be a successful version of Magneto. He's cunning, he's sadistic when he needs to be, he plans out all of his actions, he takes advantage of opportunities when they arise, he's charismatic, he's absolutely someone you could get behind. We've seen it where he's had factions in WWE. I think he's a perfect person to play Magneto. I also kind of considered Kevin Nash for the role. I thought Kevin Nash would fit, but thinking about it, and some of the other guys that we had to cast, you can't have Magneto be bigger than some of the other stars, and we'll get to them when I get there, that are considered to be the giants. So that's why I went with Orton over Nash. I think it's a fantastic pick in my opinion. I think Orton would be perfect for the role. Now going from that, what most people would consider the second in command or the co-leader, or even sometimes she's been the leader, Mystique. For Mystique, I needed someone, again, that could pull off that deviousness when needed. I needed someone that could pull off that sensuous look when they're in their basic form, I guess you would say, or their non-shape-shifted form. And I also needed someone that you could believe could switch in and out of these characters. For that, I thought about a wrestler that has done a lot of cosplay, that has done a lot of outfit changes and gear changes to kind of look a certain part at certain times, and the one I thought of was Zelina Vega. Zelina, to me, is a chameleon inside the wrestling ring, which kind of works with what Mystique does, because Zelina can be evil, she could be good, she could be a high flyer, she could be a wrestler, she could be a brawler. She's so good at everything that I think a lot of times she gets overlooked on just how great of a wrestler and just how great of a talent she is, because she could be slotted in any role and she excels in it. And you would think that would be a plus, but once you're in that kind of thing, you also kind of get put in a role kind of like a Dolph Ziggler has, where you're the person that they use to get other people over. Like I said, I think she would be a natural leader if you wanted to do where Mystique splits off the Brotherhood from Magneto. She'd also make a great second in command. This is why I think Zelina Vega would be perfect for the role. Next up, one of Magneto's children, or at least in some versions of the story, Quicksilver. For Quicksilver, I needed a wrestler that gave confidence while also being ultra fast, and there's a lot of wrestlers that could pull that off. The one guy that, to me, I would think would fit this role in, who also kind of gives you that thing where you want to root for him even if they are a bad guy. The wrestler I thought of for this is Speedball Mike Bailey. Speedball Mike Bailey, to me, is a guy who I think over the last 2 years, or maybe even a little bit more, is in the conversation of being one of the best wrestlers in the world. I love the matches he's having. I love the character building he does. I don't think he quite gets the press that other great wrestlers do just because he's on Impact Wrestling, where a lot of people don't watch Impact Wrestling, or at least not as many as, say, AEW or WWE. But I absolutely believe that Speedball Mike Bailey is one of the top talents in the world. I think he would be perfect in this role. Heck, Speed is part of his nickname, And if you got a guy like Quicksilver, you need a guy that's fast. That's why I think we need to go with Speedball Mike Bailey. I think he fits the role perfectly. Now, going from that, one of the standouts of the X-Men films, Toad. In the films, he was depicted by Ray Park, and it was a little bit different depiction than what he had classically been described as in the comic books. He wasn't necessarily as grotesque as the comic book version was, so I took a little bit of that into the account into when I was casting this character. And for me, much like I said with Quicksilver, I needed someone for Toad that I thought was highly acrobatic, that could pull off some flips, that could pull off some jumps. And when you think of acrobatic wrestlers, you think of somebody that flips. Your mind doesn't go too far before you get to Ricochet. Here's why I think Ricochet would be perfect. Much like Ray Park being cast as Toad in the original X-Men movies, Ricochet's that guy that everybody loves but doesn't quite seem to get those breakout roles. I guarantee you, if you asked 100 fans coming out of Monday Night Raw or coming out of SmackDown where they would rank Ricochet as part of their favorite wrestlers, maybe not the best wrestler on the show, but their favorites, he would be in their top 5 or 10. And he's a guy that has that charisma to him, that has that likability, while also being able to pull off the underdog part, which is something that goes with Toad. Toad is definitely an underdog. For something like that, I definitely think Ricochet is absolutely perfect for the role. Now, going from that, a guy that's pretty much been depicted the same, whether it be comic books, cartoons, or movies, the Blob. Now, the Blob is an interesting character to me. He's a massive, no way to put this easy, fat guy who is ultra strong. He has superhuman strength. He's been portrayed as impenetrable. So to me, I had to think of a guy that also fit that role. A guy that may not have the best physique, and not to sugarcoat it, and this is coming from a guy who considers himself a fat guy, and obviously you guys can see it. I'm not a skinny man, so I needed a fat wrestler. And you would think that'd be kind of easy to fill. There have been plenty through the history of wrestling. You got your Bam Bam Bigelows, your Big Van Vaders, your one-man gangs. However, this generation doesn't have too many of them. So I had to really think of this, and what I considered maybe Keith Lee, but then I remembered I already used Keith Lee for my X-Men. Well, I came up with the perfect answer, and it was watching MLW TV, Juicy Finale. Now, there's a lot other than the size that makes him perfect for this role. Juicy can be intimidating, he can be comedic, he can bring those parts of the character out. Blob in some iterations has had that comedic side, and in others he's been stoic, and I think if you task Juicy with either of those two, he could pull them off really well. I think he's a guy that we're just starting to see scratch the surface of his talents in wrestling. I think he's someone that we really need to see a lot more of, and hopefully we get to see him on one of the bigger stages at some point. I think he'd be absolutely perfect for the character. Like I said, it's kind of a hard role to cast because his main attribute is just being big. Even with those limitations, I think Juicy would bring a lot to the character and make it more humanized than a lot of the portrayals we've seen of him. Now, going from that, we're going to what a lot of people consider one of their favorite of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Sabertooth. Now, we can't have Wolverine without having Sabertooth, just like Batman and the Joker, just like Daredevil and the Kingpin, the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom. You need the anti-hero to go against the hero or the villain for the hero. So for his part, we have to cast Sabertooth. Now, the interesting thing is, Sabertooth has already been played by a wrestler. If you go back to the original movies, he was played by a wrestler named Tyler Mane. So I could have easily just said, we're going to keep Tyler Mane. But I wanted to keep it with wrestlers of this generation, or if need be, an older person, a wrestler that had retired recently. For that, I needed a big guy, a muscular guy, a guy that could pull off Sabertooth. And the one guy that came to my mind was Big Bill, aka Big Cass, aka W. Morrissey. Big Bill's went through a transformation and has really made himself into a shredded, statuesque picture of what a wrestler should look like. He hasn't quite got the chance on AEW that he was getting in Impact Wrestling as W. Morrissey. But he's a guy that I think the redemption story and his whole story, I think he could bring that into the role, and he could bring that pain that he suffered and that anger at the world into Sabertooth. I think he would be a perfect foil for Wolverine. I think he'd be a great visual for my Wolverine. I cast Davey Richards. Big Bill is at least a foot taller than Davey Richards, if not more, which is kind of, if you read the comic books and you've seen the fights between Wolverine and Sabertooth, Sabertooth towers over him, so that is part of this. I just think that anger and the emotion that Big Bill could portray, which he does really well, I think it would work well for Sabertooth. I think he'd be perfect for this role. Sticking with the giant members of the Brotherhood, we're going to go to Juggernaut, another guy who has a lot of fandom from the fans of the X-Men, from the fans of the Brotherhood. Juggernaut's one of those characters that I don't think has really been portrayed great in the movies. I mean, there's always the meme-tastic, "I'm the Juggernaut, bitch." That's the most meaningful and memorable thing from the Juggernaut in the movie so far. So for me, I really needed a guy that could take the attention and draw it to him and make the Juggernaut an important character, just as important as he is in the comic books. And for that, I thought of one man, the almighty Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley is pretty much the Juggernaut in wrestling. He's unstoppable. He's a force that keeps going forward. He's a guy that has an unlimited motor, which was part of why I chose him. A guy that can go for 60 minutes, that can wrestle and out-wrestle you, but he's also a monster and massive and intimidating just to look at him. I think that Bobby Lashley would be absolutely perfect as the Juggernaut. I think he could convey that while also making the Juggernaut feel more important than he has in some of his movie depictions. For that reason, that's why I picked him for the role. Now next up, this is one of my favorite Brotherhood characters, Avalanche. Now there's two kind of versions of Avalanche. There's the one from the comic books, and then there's the one from the X-Men Evolution cartoon, which they switched the character a lot. They switched a lot of characters in the X-Men Evolution cartoon, but most of them kept a lot of their backstory. Avalanche's was switched. For me, I enjoyed that depiction. I like both versions. I'm a fan of Avalanche in comics, and I'm a fan of him in this cartoon. And X-Men Evolution, really good cartoon. It's not quite as good as the 90s X-Men cartoon, and by the time they got to their last season, it got a little bit off the rails, but to me it was a very good cartoon. And one of the standouts in the show was Avalanche. Because of that, I kind of would want my Avalanche character in the movie to be based off of that portrayal. And for someone like that, we need someone that you would believe is the quarterback of the football team, yet kind of a smart-ass, kind of a asshole, the guy that you would see at the keg parties that would be hazing the other members of the team, yet still somewhat have a soft side to him. And for me, the guy that I thought of for this role is Daniel Garcia. I think Daniel Garcia definitely portrays that smarmy varsity athlete, I'm better than you feel to him, all while giving you something to care about. I think he's a guy that could portray this, and like I said, because the character that I have in mind is younger, I wanted to go with a little bit of a younger wrestler. Garcia seems like the kind that wants to think that he's a leader, but is easily manipulated, which is perfect for the role of Avalanche. Especially, and I keep harkening back to this, in the Evolution series, he was the de facto person in charge when Magneto wasn't around, but ultimately he answered to Magneto. Kind of where Daniel Garcia is. Daniel Garcia, as part of the JAS, doesn't feel like he's the leader. He's answering to either Jericho or Sammy Guevara. But you do know that he has that in him, that he has those leadership qualities, those capabilities. I think he'd be perfect for the role. I think he could pull it off. I think he'd be an awesome Avalanche. Now, last but not least, I thought about leaving this one off because they're such a prominent role in the Marvel movies as they are right now. But I also thought to myself, it's one of the most important characters and members of the Brotherhood, and that's the Scarlet Witch. Now, I do think Elizabeth Olsen does a fantastic role in the movies, in the TV shows. I think she's perfect at it. I think she's awesome. That newest Doctor Strange movie, I thought she was fantastic in the role. The Vision and the Scarlet Witch TV show, I thought she was great. The little pieces that she brings, where you could see her motivations for being evil at times, really add something to that character. So I had a lot of hesitation with putting her on here because why would I take that away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe? But in sticking with the theme, we want to have someone that's a professional wrestler in that role. So for me, I'm going with Julia Hart. Now personally, I'm a huge fan of Julia Hart. I think the leaps and bounds that she's taken since joining up with the House of Black, as far as character-wise, have put her in a lot better standing, in my opinion, than where she was a year ago. A year ago, she was just a cheerleader. Now, you feel like she's an important part of one of the most important factions on AEW, being part of the House of Black. And it kind of feels like they're leaning towards her being the person that's pulling all the strings in the House of Black right now. The way she's portrayed in this kind of reminds me of the evil version of Scarlet Witch, where the ends justify the means. Julia Hart had been a white meat babyface, but that never got her anywhere. She turns to the dark side, and now she's with the champions. Now she's an important part on the TV show. And I think she'd absolutely be perfect in this role. I think she would fit it very well. She can pull off that evilness in the Scarlet Witch, and if you need her to turn back and become on the good guys team or join the Avengers again, you can easily see Julia Hart going back to that very girl next door, good girl persona that she had previously. I think she'd be great for the role. Ultimately, that's why I put her in here. If we were really going to say it, I wouldn't recast the character at all, but just to keep it with the theme, I think she would do great. With all that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Who would you cast in some of these roles? Do you think I cast the wrong people? Is there someone you think might be a better Toad, a better Juggernaut, a better Magneto? Let me know down here in the comments. And I know I said this on my X-Men, and I got a lot of positive. I didn't get any negative from it, so I'm going to say it again. If you like what I'm doing with these, a little bit of crossover between wrestling and comic books, do you want to see me do another one? I know I heard some comments where people mentioned stuff like the Justice League, some other teams. Let me know down in the comments. Let me know if you'd like to see me do another one of these with maybe something totally different. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of How I Would Have Booked.